Hi there. I'm James with ERA Four Feathers Realty here in Sierra Vista, Arizona. And if you're a home buyer, seller, or just someone curious about how real estate transactions work here in Arizona, then this video is for you. Today we're going to be diving into the Arizona Association of Realtors Real Estate Agency and Disclosure Election Form, which is going to outline important roles and responsibilities of real estate agents and brokers in your transaction. So, depending on if you're a buyer or seller, this is going to be either the first or second form you sign. This is done pretty early on and it's pretty important because before you enter into a discussion with an agent, whether you're buying or selling, it's going to be crucial to understand what type of agency relationship you'll have with them. And this form is going to clarify that so you know exactly what to expect. So let's get into it. The top portion is just information, the brokerage, the agent, and yourself. And then it's going to go on to say disclosure before and define words, whether what a seller means, what a buyer means. And it goes on, it starts really at line 7, and it's going to explain a buyer's broker. So first let's talk about this buyer broker. Now this is going to be an agent working under a brokerage that will represent the buyer and works on their behalf. This buyer's agent has the fiduciary duties of loyalty, obedience, confidentiality, disclosure, accounting, and reasonable skill and care. An acronym that can help you remember this is OLDCAR. Even though the seller might compensate a buyer's broker, the broker is not representing the seller, and this means that the buyer broker is solely looking out for the buyer's interest. Form goes on at line 14. Seller's broker. So a seller's broker is the one who has a listing agreement with the seller. They represent the seller's best interest with the same fiduciary duties of OLDCAR, or obedience, loyalty, confidentiality, disclosure, accounting, and reasonable skill and care. A seller's broker is also not representing potential buyers, even if they're there showing the property to interested buyers. Now that's pretty common at an open house. Okay, so this next portion here, buyer representing both seller and buyer. Broker representing both seller and buyer. And that's going to create a situation called limited representation. And that's when the broker represents both sides. Again, agents work for their brokerage. So if in this example, I was a listing agent and another agent in this office was the buying agent, this still would enter into limited representation because both agents work on behalf of the brokerage. So what happens if a broker represents both the buyer and seller? Well, this is known as limited representation. And in this case, the broker must have informed consent of both parties. They cannot disclose confidential information between the two without permission, and they must navigate potential conflicts of interest carefully. Now, this may sound kind of scary at first, and it's not a bad thing. This will just change how us agents can be involved in the transaction. It's going to limit and pretty much remove my ability to advise on matters relating to this transaction because I cannot harm one side of the party or the other. So we'll get in more into limited representation in another time, in another video called Consent to Limited Representation. But before I move on, I just want to say it does have some upsides and it can lead to quicker closing times, potentially. Okay. So what are the broker's duties and what do you need to know? So regardless of who the broker represents, we are always required to act with reasonable skill, care, and honesty. And we have to disclose all known facts that could materially affect the transaction. Now, an important note here, certain things, like whether the property has been the site of a crime, its connection to a disease like HIV, those are not required to be disclosed under Arizona law. Now, that could be important to some people, but again, buyers, you need to do your due diligence. It's not required of us to disclose these things. So, moving on. Seller and buyer's responsibilities. Again, it is really important to remember that a broker's duties do not relieve the seller or the buyer from protecting their own interest. Please read through your agreements carefully and make sure they reflect what you want out of the transaction. Okay, we're going to move this down a little bit. The form goes on for compensation. Compensation is going to be the amount a buyer or seller pays their brokerage, and again, it is negotiable, whether it's for the buyer's broker or seller's broker. The compensation is not set by law. It is not set by any agency. It is not set by any organization outside of what you negotiate between a discussion with your agent or your broker. Now, last week I covered a form called the Buyer-Broker Agreement to Show Property, and in that video we learned that as a potential buyer in Arizona, in order to see properties, you're going to need a signed buyer-broker agreement to show property. And that form lays out the buyer-broker compensation right up front in that form. That's going to be the first thing you see to even see a property. We're going to agree and know what my rates are, so you're not surprised later. And this is going to be the second form signed before we even continue. So now, compensation is also spelled out in the employment contract or listing contract, and both of these will be covered in another video at a later date. So, to summarize, the real estate agency and disclosure election form is all about making sure that you, as a buyer or seller, understand the role the broker and agent working on their behalf is playing in this transaction. Whether they represent just you or both parties, it is essential that you are clear on your relationship with them. So, if you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe for more real estate tips, and if you have any questions about agency disclosure form or anything else related to buying or selling real estate in Arizona, feel free to leave a comment below. Thanks for watching. Until next time, happy home buying or selling. Thanks.